Welcome back to Motivation Library, where we take those intriguing books, the ones that everybody's talking about, and we really dig into them and pull out the most thought-provoking parts.
Yeah.
Today, we're cracking open what men don't want women to know.
Yeah.
The secrets, the lies, the unspoken truth.
Oh, juicy.
It's by Smith and Doe, and even the title. I mean, come on, the title's a grabber, and they kick things off with the disclaimer that's almost a dare.
It is, yeah.
It says, the contents of this book may make you physically ill and possibly cause irreparable emotional and psychological damage.
Like, are you brave enough?
Yeah, exactly.
Right from the start, they're setting this tone, right? Like, it's meant to be shocking, and they're going all in with their claim that, everything they're revealing is 100% true, even if, no man would ever admit it and no woman wants to hear it.
Right.
So the question is, what truths could be so unsettling?
Exactly. The first chapter, Man, a Sexual Animal, kind of dives right in with the author's core premise. Men are ruled by biology, specifically the flow of blood. They go so far as to say if a man gets the chance for sex with an attractive woman and there's no risk of consequences, he will do it every single time.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this immediately kind of raises a flag for me because, reducing male sexuality to purely a biological imperative ignores, right, the huge role of personal values, emotional connection, individual circumstances. It's a vast oversimplification and potentially a very harmful one.
And they kind of double down on this idea with an analogy.
Yeah.
A penis is like a loaded gun.
Okay.
Dangerous when loaded, safe when unloaded.
Right.
And they argue blood flow to the genitals actually reduces blood flow to the brain, impacting judgment and fidelity.
If this analogy is not only reductive, it could actually be damaging, I think. Because instead of fostering understanding, right, it paints this picture of men as inherently dangerous and uncontrollable. It ignores the complexities of consent, intimacy, making it seem like women should always be on guard. And instead of promoting communication and healthy relationships, this kind of language really creates a foundation of fear and suspicion.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder about the impact this could have on a relationship, right? Like if a woman internalizes that image, is she ever going to fully trust her partner?
That's a crucial point, yeah.
Yeah.
And it brings us to another controversial claim, the chapter on men's secret gardens. So the authors say men harbor deep, dark fantasies, right, that they'll never share, often involving other women.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they connect this back to that flow of blood concept, arguing it's this primal urge overriding rational thought. They even make the startling claim that most men fantasize about their partner being gangbanged by the New York Knicks.
This is where we have to pause and consider the ethics of revealing or even exploiting someone's private fantasies. Fantasies can serve many psychological functions. A safe space to explore desires, a way to cope with stress, even a source of creativity. It's crucial to differentiate fantasy from action, right? And avoid judging individuals based on their private thoughts.
Absolutely. And it raises the question, do the authors have any solid research to back up this claim? Or are they just making provocative generalizations?
Yeah, good question. Another theory they present is the two basic states of men, loaded and unloaded. Loaded meaning high sexual desire, and unloaded the period after orgasm when that need supposedly decreases. They even have a graph showing how the loading period increases as men age.
They present it as a scientific fact, but is there really any evidence to support this?
This is where critical thinking is key. We have to question whether this loaded versus unloaded framework has any scientific basis, or if it's just a convenient oversimplification. Applying such a simplistic model to real relationships could lead to all sorts of misunderstandings, potentially putting pressure on women to constantly meet their partner's perceived sexual needs.
Yeah. It seems like it could create a lot of unnecessary anxiety in a relationship.
Exactly. And it might prevent couples from having open and honest conversations about their desires and boundaries.
The book also digs into this idea of the double standard, where men judge themselves and each other differently than they judge women.
Yeah.
They give examples like how a man having an affair is sowing his wild oats, but a woman doing the same is labeled promiscuous. Or the man's anger is seen as powerful, while a woman's is emotional or hysterical.
Right. And according to the authors, this double standard is maintained through a system they call men helping men. Essentially, men covering for each other's actions to uphold these harmful norms and keep women in the dark.
They share a story about a guy named Louis, who lies about his dinner plans and then fabricates this whole elaborate cover story, helped by another man. But couldn't you argue that this is an example of people, regardless of gender, sometimes making bad choices and trying to avoid the consequences?
Yeah, that's a valid point. While this anecdote is presented as evidence of some grand conspiracy, it might be more about individual behavior than a systemic issue. We need to be careful not to overgeneralize from isolated incidents. And it's also crucial to consider the role of societal conditioning and cultural norms in shaping these double standards. It's not just about men versus women, it's about the messages we all receive about gender roles from a very young age.
It does seem like a complex issue with no easy answers. And then the book takes a pretty bold stance, stating flatly, men lie constantly. They claim men have perfected the art of denial, doing whatever it takes to hide their actions and avoid responsibility.
While dishonesty is certainly a human flaw, painting all men as chronic liars is both inaccurate and potentially damaging.
Right. It's important to remember that generalizations can be incredibly hurtful, especially in the context of a relationship. This kind of thinking could really erode trust.
Exactly. And rather than eliminating some hidden truth, it risks perpetuating harmful stereotypes that don't reflect the complexity of human behavior.
Then they shift focus to the workplace, calling it a minefield of temptation for men,
Right.
claiming it's a dangerous environment for fidelity.
Yeah.
They even argue that men will intentionally create temptation-filled environments to satisfy their desire for female attention.
What's particularly concerning is their rule of thumb guide to office relationships, which suggests that a man's access to sexually receptive females increases with his power. This kind of thinking not only objectifies women, but it completely ignores the very real issues of power dynamics and sexual harassment in the workplace.
Yeah. They even go so far as to say that men will hire women based on looks rather than qualifications just to have them around.
And if true, that kind of behavior is completely unacceptable and creates a hostile work environment for women. It's a serious issue that deserves attention, but framing it as a natural consequence of male desire further marginalizes women and downplays the need for accountability and systemic change.
And then they claim that most men's cheating happens on business trips, citing something they call the 400-mile rule. Basically, the idea that men feel safe from being caught when they're at least 400 miles from home.
Right, and they illustrate this with anecdotes about men using business trips to unload with escorts and prostitutes. It's important to acknowledge the emotional toll this kind of infidelity can have on the partner who is left at home, feeling betrayed and alone.
Absolutely. Infidelity is a deeply personal issue with far-reaching consequences, and it's never okay to dismiss or minimize the pain it can cause.
I couldn't agree more. And while the book's portrayal of male behavior might be extreme, it does bring up some important questions about trust, fidelity, and the complexities of relationships in today's world.
That's a great point. We'll be back with part 2, where we delve deeper into the book's claims and explore some alternative perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. Picking up where we left off, the book goes on to delve into some specific tactics men supposedly use to hide infidelity on business trips.
Okay, so what kind of tactics are we talking about?
They actually advise women to scrutinize their partner's credit card statements after a business trip. So any charges over $150 that don't clearly look like restaurant bills are suspect, possibly for escort services. They even suggest contacting the credit card company to get contact information for suspicious charges.
That seems a little extreme, doesn't it? It really points to this level of distrust that's already, pretty unhealthy.
Exactly, and it gets worse. They recommend all sorts of interrogation techniques, like casually mentioning dinner plans weeks later to see if your partner even remembers who he was supposedly with.
Yeah, it's like they're encouraging this culture of suspicion and paranoia within relationships instead of fostering open communication and trust.
You hit the nail on the head. While some of their advice might seem practical on the surface, it's built on the assumption that men are inherently deceptive and women need to be constantly vigilant.
Speaking of vigilance, the next chapter focuses on what they call a quickie, which is their term for a one-night stand.
Yeah, and this is where their flow of blood theory really takes center stage. They argue that men are biologically programmed to seek out new sexual partners, regardless of their emotional commitments.
So even if a man is deeply in love, they're saying he'll still be tempted by the opportunity for a quickie.
That's their premise, and it's a pretty cynical one. They even go so far as to claim that the desire for a one-night stand is so strong that a man won't even try to bargain with a prostitute. He'll just pay whatever she asks.
It's a pretty bleak view of human nature. But on the other hand, I guess it's possible there's some truth to it. People are complex.
It's certainly a provocative claim, but, as we've discussed, it's important to remember that the authors don't present any scientific evidence to support these theories. They rely heavily on anecdotes and personal observations, which aren't necessarily representative of the broader population.
No, we have to take these assertions with a grain of salt. Not every man fits this mold. And the book moves on to a topic that's sure to raise some eyebrows. Bachelor parties.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
The authors claim that there's no such thing as a mellow bachelor party and that strippers and prostitutes are practically mandatory elements.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Hey.
Are they suggesting that this kind of behavior is just inevitable?
It seems that way, yeah. They even share this anecdote about a man who assures his fiancée that there won't be any prostitutes at his bachelor party, but then proceeds to sleep with multiple women anyway.
It's disappointing, to say the least. It paints a picture of men as being incapable of resisting temptation, even when they've committed to someone.
Exactly, and what's particularly troubling is how they frame these events as being somehow outside the bounds of normal relationship expectations.
Like it's just boys being boys.
Precisely, and that kind of thinking can be incredibly damaging because it normalizes infidelity and excuses it as just a part of male nature.
So what's the takeaway for someone who's about to get married? Should they just accept this as inevitable?
Absolutely not. I think it's crucial to have open and honest conversations with your partner about your expectations for, pre-wedding celebrations. If you're not comfortable with strippers or prostitutes being present, make that clear. And if your partner isn't willing to respect those boundaries, that's a major red flag.
That's good advice. After all the negativity and cynicism, the book concludes with a section called A Faint Ray of Hope.
Yes. Despite all the doom and gloom, the authors do offer a glimmer of optimism.
Okay, I'm surprised. What kind of hope are we talking about?
Well, they acknowledge that not all men are bad. There are some good guys out there. But their definition of a good guy is pretty limited.
Okay, how so?
They describe a good guy as someone who's completely faithful, never even looking at another woman.
Wow, that sets a pretty high bar. Is that even realistic?
It's a very narrow definition that focuses solely on sexual fidelity while ignoring other important qualities in a partner like respect, empathy, emotional availability. It also reinforces the harmful stereotype that men are purely visual creatures who can't control their gaze.
It seems like they're setting both men and women up for failure with this unrealistic ideal.
That's a valid concern, yeah. And even in this section where they're supposedly offering hope, they still manage to perpetuate some pretty harmful gender stereotypes.
Like what?
Well, they compare men to dogs who need training and discipline to behave properly.
That's an interesting analogy.
To say the least. And honestly, I find it pretty offensive. Reducing men to animals who need to be trained by women reinforces this outdated idea that men are inherently incapable of controlling themselves, and it's women's responsibility to manage their behavior.
It definitely feels like a step backward in terms of gender equality. So after all that, what's the final takeaway from this book? Is there anything valuable to be gleaned from it?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride with this book, to say the least.
It has.
After spending so much time with these rather extreme views of male behavior, is there anything you think listeners could take away from what men don't want women to know, or is it best just left on the shelf?
That's the million-dollar question. I think while I wouldn't recommend this book as like a relationship guide, I do think it offers a glimpse into a certain mindset that some men might hold. Yeah. The authors clearly believe they're pulling back the curtain on some hidden truth.
Right.
But their analysis often feels reductive and overly simplistic.
It does seem like they're trying to fit all men into one box, which just isn't realistic or fair.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest issues with this book is that it fosters distrust and suspicion rather than understanding and empathy. I see what you mean. It's like they're encouraging women to be constantly on the lookout for signs of infidelity and deception, which isn't exactly a recipe for a healthy relationship.
Right. It's not about living in a constant state of paranoia.
Yeah.
Every relationship is unique, and what works for one couple might not work for another, There's no magic formula for preventing infidelity or guaranteeing happiness.
So if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's feeling insecure or uncertain in their relationship, what would it be?
I would say focus on communication. Talk to your partner about your fears and concerns, and really listen to what they have to say in return. Building a strong foundation of trust and mutual respect is essential for navigating the inevitable ups and downs that every relationship faces.
That's such a crucial point. Relationships thrive on open and honest communication.
Absolutely.
Well, we've definitely explored some thought-provoking and sometimes unsettling ideas today.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive into what men don't want women to know?
It's been quite the journey.
It has.
While this book might offer some food for thought, it's important to take its claims with a grain of salt and remember that there's always more to the story. Human behavior, especially within relationships, is far more complex than any single book can capture.
Absolutely. A huge thanks to you for joining us on this deep dive and to our listeners for tuning in. We always appreciate you being here at Motivation Library, where we unpack complex topics and leave you with something to ponder. We'll be back with another deep dive into a new book soon, so make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it.